The aha moment was more along the lines of anytime you look at endovascular equipment, you're trying to shrink it down, make it smaller and smaller, because endovascular equipment goes through access sites in the body. And anytime you poke a hole through the skin into an artery, you do worry about a larger hole being formed by a larger device. So if you can miniaturize it in any way, that always makes it safer. Going with that principle is what really led us to the COBRA-OS.
Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're joined by an extraordinary guest, Dr. Adam Power, co-founder and chief medical officer of Frontline Medical Technologies. Dr. Power is a globally recognized leader in trauma and emergency care innovation. His mission? Lowering barriers to bleeding control and resuscitation by developing smarter, safer, and more accessible solutions. Dr. Power was instrumental in the development of the COBRA-OS, a next-generation REBOA device that offers speed, simplicity, and safety in the most critical moments of trauma care. Alongside his innovation work, Dr. Power remains active in clinical care and academics as a vascular surgeon at Western University, where he's been a member of the Division of Vascular Surgery since 2012. Hey, Adam, are you ready to be our guru today?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, Tom.
It's great to have you. We're very excited. And, we always start out with just tell us something fun or exciting about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you were around London, Ontario here, you might run into two of us because I'm an identical twin. And my identical twin is a surgeon as well. He's a urologist. So we like to joke that we're both plumbers. He deals in the yellow stuff and I'm in the red.
I love that. And I do actually go through London, Ontario from time to time. I take the train from Windsor to Toronto. That's my favorite way to get to Toronto, frankly. Mm-hmm. So I'll keep a watch. So, Adam, you've successfully made the leap from really full-time clinician to medtech entrepreneur. And I'm wondering if you could share with us what motivated that transition and what have been some of the biggest surprises along the way?
Yeah, I think that I've always been interested in innovation and future technologies. That's probably the main reason I chose vascular surgery, because it is an environment where devices are changing all the time. And really the devices that I'm using now, I won't be using when I'm ready to retire in 20 years. I find that very exciting. But also being involved in the academic environment, I've always loved research and doing things that are different. When I was researching things, obviously my active brain came up with different options for new technologies. And early in my practice, early in my career, I did invent, quite a few different little devices, little improvements here and there. But after speaking with big medical device industry many times, I figured that if I was ever going to be able to use something on a patient in my hands that came out of my brain, I'd kind of have to do it myself. And so that's why, that's how all of this started.
Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of times that's the only way to do it, because the big companies are looking for a little more sales volume, a little more traction before they get into it. Is that what you experienced?
Yes, absolutely. And I did find as well that the big companies are, they do like to speak to physicians, frontline surgeons, but depending on their process and their innovation process, they may not be ready for whatever you're proposing to them. So yeah, that might be 5 years from now where this cycle will come around again, where we're going to improve on this particular device of ours. So it's really all about timing more than anything. Speaking to some of the big endovascular companies, at least that was my experience. But I'll tell you that, I learned a lot talking to them. I had to learn their language. I had to use some of the information that I had to use for trying to sell the device to them was very different in the research environment or the clinical environment, where you're focused a lot on patient outcomes versus, well, can we even afford to make this device?
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned, small steps, little innovations along the way, and I always get interested in this because innovation usually happens in small gradients or there's an aha moment, right? So I'm wondering if there was an aha moment in your clinical work that sparked the idea, that generated the concept for Frontline Medical and the COBRA-OS. Can you help us out with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to really say that these aha moments were with my partner, Dr. Asha Parekh. She's a PhD biomedical engineer. She's the CEO of the company. And we've really done this all together, really scratching our heads way back when. And, we had worked on a few projects before Frontline, but Frontline really came out of an idea where we thought we could improve on what was currently going on in the marketplace. And we not only could we improve on it, we actually knew that we could develop this particular device. It sort of checked all the boxes. Wasn't the most complicated device that we've ever come up with. We certainly invented other things that may have had that may be a lot fancier, a lot more innovative, and more disruptive. But this particular device, we thought, you know what? We can do a lot of this on our own for not a whole lot of money, and this was, and we knew it would be successful. And at the very end of it all, we knew that it would have a huge patient impact. And so, as I said, it checked all the boxes for us. The aha moment was more along the lines of anytime you look at endovascular equipment, you're trying to shrink it down, make it smaller and smaller, because endovascular equipment goes through access sites in the body. And anytime you poke a hole through the skin into an artery, you do worry about a larger hole being formed by a larger device. So if you can miniaturize it in any way, that always makes it safer. And so going with that principle is what really led us to the COBRA-OS.
Yeah, interesting. And with that, let's take a little deeper dive because I'm kind of curious because being in trauma care like you mentioned and trying to get things smaller and smaller, you obviously bring a unique perspective to the design of the COBRA-OS. So what were those clinical challenges you were trying to solve, and how did that shape the development of your device?
Yeah, so when I actually started in practice, I'll back up even further, is that before endovascular balloons were available for trauma, if you showed up to the emergency department with non-compressible trauma, meaning it's in the torso or abdominal region where you can't actually put your finger on it and direct pressure, and it's not in one of your extremities where you can put a tourniquet on, those are the people that die in the emergency departments or pre-hospital, because you can empty almost your entire blood volume into your chest, your abdomen. And so the only way to save them, way back when I was starting things, when I was a general surgeon, a trauma surgeon, a resident, is to open up their chest and put a clamp on their aorta. And so if you're bleeding in the abdomen and you open up someone's chest and put a clamp on their aorta, what that does is it really blocks off the blood flow for whatever's bleeding, the spleen or the liver in the abdomen. But my goodness, that's a huge thing to do, and you need to be very skilled to be able to do that quickly. And not many patients survive an emergency room thoracotomy with cross clamping of the aorta. But the idea of being able to turn off the tap of blood flow is something that really stuck with a lot of these early pioneers. And so the idea is using balloon. It's not a new idea to use a balloon instead of a clamp. But if you access the femoral artery and snake up a catheter, a balloon catheter, instead of clamping from the outside, you can inflate a balloon on the inside that actually functionally acts like a clamp or an internal tourniquet, and therefore there's no flow into those bleeding areas. But those first devices were huge. I mean, as big as your baby finger. That's how big these devices were. And as we were just talking about, if you make a hole as big as your baby finger going into a blood vessel, that can cause a lot of issues. If it's in the leg, you can, mess up the blood flow to your leg. You can end up with an amputation or, many other things. And so trying to be place, and plus trying to place one of these huge devices, you needed to be quite skilled to do it, let alone when you removed it all there was a big hole. that was really where we thought we can improve on things. And that there were other companies out there that were trying to miniaturize it. We talk about diameter and endovascular as French sizes. And so the original ones, as big as my baby finger, were about 12 French. There were some devices on the market that were 7 French. But we felt, let's go even further. And that's how we developed the COBRA-OS and aimed for 4 French. And 4 French is just, it's about the size of an IV. And to put an IV in, you'd be able to deploy it, quite quickly and safely. And then when you were all done, if you pulled everything out, there was no issues with access site complications.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I would imagine with that smaller size, you can even treat, other types of wounds, right? Because you're able to get further and deeper into certain extremities. Am I heading down the right path there?
Yeah, and I would say not even just the other, like it certainly has led to different applications, because using a smaller device allows you to think about placing them in patients with smaller anatomies, such as female. And so one of the big applications for the COBRA-OS is in postpartum hemorrhage or in accreta. And women have smaller blood vessels than men. And so you can't put a huge device in a pregnant woman. And so, our device is being used throughout the world, even for postpartum hemorrhage and these accreta cases. And so, yeah, like miniaturizing things has really led to placing it in smaller anatomy and off instructions for use, and not approved, but thinking of the future is pediatrics. There aren't many occlusion balloons that can be used in pediatrics, but when you think about 4 French and how small this goes, you can start thinking about, wow, well, maybe the future might hold for pediatric REBOA devices.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually thinking about that as you're explaining it, right? That would be kind of that natural extension if you could get it just a little bit smaller. That sounds really exciting. And then, innovation in trauma obviously can't come at the expense of patient safety. So, I'm just kind of curious, when you looked at that, I mean, obviously these patients are bleeding out and you've got to do something quickly, but at the same time, you want to have a safe design and do all the testing and regulatory phases. So tell us a little bit about that. How did you go about that process?
Yeah, so I did borrow a lot of the principles and knowledge and experience that I had as a vascular surgeon. And so we did not veer from a design perspective, we did not veer off many of those principles that were known to be safe for patients. And I think that's really important is, there are you have a certain target as far as what you want to accomplish, but there are principles that you shouldn't really sacrifice when you're trying to get there. For instance, for balloons, the same materials that you want to be using for the balloons if you can. As far as as far as the catheter materials, as far as the catheter compliance, the balloon compliance, the inner wires those are all sort of off the shelf components that are known to be safe in patients. We put them all together into one package in a different way, and really sort of re-engineered an angioplasty balloon, so that typical angioplasty balloons are over the wire, meaning you place an endovascular wire first, and then you insert a balloon catheter over the wire. There's an inner channel that fits the wire. That takes an endovascular specialist to do. And so what we did is we actually put the wire inside of the balloon. And so it was just one unit. And so it was almost like the balloon was molded over top of the wire. So once the wire was in place, all you had to do was inflate it. And that was the idea was, well, let's make it really simplistic for non-endovascular specialists. An endovascular specialist is fine to be doing this, but you're not going to have those roadside or pre-hospital or in all the trauma and emergency departments.
Yeah, that makes total sense, right? So let's get into maybe a real world story, right? Because we can all relate to that. Since you've launched, is there a scenario or an example that comes to mind where the COBRA-OS made a real significant difference in patient outcomes? Can you share a story with us there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we hear lots of different stories from our customers that are very impactful. They're literally the reason why we're doing this. I'm a bit odd in the fact that I can share my own personal stories with patients, and one that comes to mind is happened over the past year. And I'm a surgeon in the hospital that I work at, and this device is being used there. And there was a patient that came in with a pelvic fracture, and the orthopedic surgeon, when he saw the X-ray, said, "This is not survivable." And they called us to actually, place the COBRA-OS in the patient to help them to stay alive. And the orthopedic surgeon was like, "Of course, we'll try for this patient, but this is not survivable." And went in, took the patient. They did what they had to do, external fixation. They did an angiogram and embolized all the little bleeders in the pelvis. And the COBRA-OS kept that patient alive. And he literally could not believe it. He said, honestly, before this device was available, I never would have said that I would ever have thought the patient would survive. So that was really rewarding, having your colleague is someone that you trust, someone that trusts you, to say that they're amazed by what the product can do, and that was really rewarding that day.
Yeah, that is really special when something like that happens, and it had to be rewarding, but also a huge validation for you too, right?
Yes, absolutely, and I the stories that come in from the different customers saying how happy they are. I mean, we've heard the name game changer a lot. We've heard people that have had other products that actually stopped doing REBOA because they didn't really like it, but they started up again using ours and they've been really happy with it. Like all of these things. And then even when we talked about those applications where for postpartum hemorrhage and for trauma, but it's being used pre-hospital in the military helping soldiers. It was used in Ukraine by Ukrainian soldiers and surgeons that we trained online. But some of the more exciting things are not even traumatic applications. And the idea of non-traumatic cardiac arrest is coming up as a really exciting application for REBOA products.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then, if I've got this right, in my research, I noted that you recently received FDA clearance for Zone 1 use. Can you explain to us why that's such a meaningful milestone, and how does that expand the reach and utility of your technology?
Sure. Yeah, and I would say that because we had Health Canada and FDA approval initially, we also have MDR approval through with CE clearance in Europe. That was our most recent certification regulatory
Nice.
achievement. We also have approval in Australia as well. But the FDA clearance was really a big milestone for us because in the United States is really where the big trauma hospitals are operating. It's where they see the most amount of trauma, and for us to get approval for Zone 1, and what does Zone 1 mean? It means that it's the part of the aorta that gets occluded, and so that's really up by the heart. That's a Zone 1 occlusion, and Zone 3 occlusion is mainly just looking at the pelvis. That's down in the abdomen. So having approval for aortic occlusion has really opened up all places that level 1 trauma centers, level 2 trauma centers that are looking at controlling non-compressible hemorrhage.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, you've also spoken about lowering barriers in trauma care. So, what does that mean in practice? And, how does that help us from urban trauma centers into remote, rural settings? And, you even mentioned the military. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting because if you had myself with all my equipment, traveling around in a bus, you could, you could save a lot of people. Of course, not just me. I'd need the team, the anesthesiologist, the nursing care, and all the particular devices and x-ray equipment that you would need to do it minimally invasive or maximally invasive. That obviously, and the farther you get away from these quaternary centers and level 1 trauma centers, the less and less resources you have. That's human resources and also equipment. So we really wanted to design something that if you showed up, if I literally showed up to an accident on the side of the road, I'd have most of the equipment available to actually place the Cobra and temporize things in order to help get a patient to hospital alive. And that's really where, just looking at it simply, including for convenience, some of the different parts that you would need for the procedure, the syringe, the access kit, the device, all packaged in a way that's not cumbersome. And also from a lowering the barriers perspective, not making it too expensive, that only, the first world countries would ever be able to afford these things. So, that's what we look at, is the simplicity, the speed, and really trying to lower all the barriers. When you look at, how difficult something is or complex, that's what we mean by lowering the barriers is, if we hear of a barrier, if we hear something, how do we overcome that? Whether that's with more training, with simulation, whether that's providing whatever you need to accomplish aortic occlusion.
Yeah, that's fantastic because, I think about that, right? You think about trauma, and I've been in this business a long time. I've spent a lot of time in emergency departments and ORs. But you think about, I happen to live now in a rural community, actually right near Lake Michigan. And I think about some of the traumas that happen, not, I'm thinking farms, but also out in the water, right? So you get a device like that placed, it's just going to buy that time until you get them to a major trauma center, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's all about buying time and keeping someone alive so that you can let the doctors and the surgeons and the nurses and everybody do what they have to.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, Adam, I'd like to shift a little bit now to some of your ongoing work at Western University. For some of our gurus out there, we've got a lot of entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. How do you see the intersection of academic medicine in clinical care and device innovation kind of intersecting and evolving over the next decade? Do you have any insights for us?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see innovation stop being a buzzword and start being more applicable, especially for academics. The word innovation is thrown around a lot, and actual practice of innovation is a little bit hard to define sometimes. I can speak specifically about, if you're in an academic environment, you're looking to get promoted. How do you get promoted? It's based on criteria that were in a lot of institutions. The criteria was made up many years ago, before really innovation was ongoing, and so things like making a patent equivalent to a publication, because patents sometimes never see the light of day. But if that's equivalent, as far as from an academic promotional standpoint, that makes a difference. The other thing is, when you're doing a lot of innovation, you do a lot of consulting, and you speak with the medical device industry about various products or what have you, or give feedback. That's not captured in any way, any meaningful way necessarily. Yes, people think that, the consultants get paid lots of money. Oftentimes they don't. They'll make more money in clinical practice than they will doing a lot of the consulting things. But having that captured in some way, where the industry actually says thank you, writes a letter to the chief of surgery saying this person was really valuable in this conversation. Those types of innovative thinking to bring innovation more into the academic environment and have it valued more. Then, why would you spend so much time doing innovation when your primary purpose is promotion at an institution? if it's not
Mhm.
captured in any way, if it's all on the side, if it's in your garage. And the other thing really, and I left this till the end, is who owns that innovation? If everything you invent is owned by the institution, where's the incentive there? And I really truly believe in inventor owned. Whether where I think a lot of places provide a lot of resources, obviously, and that should be captured. But if it's an invention coming from a clinician that's not truly working in a lab, then perhaps there should be some more leeway on inventor owned, rather than just give it up to the university.
Yeah, that's really interesting on a number of fronts. I've been in the consulting business for a number of years, and I work with a lot of innovators, and that's always a hurdle, right? That getting over that and providing that incentive to take that extra work, and oftentimes there's risk associated to the inventor as well to get something commercialized. Where if it's not, it sits on the shelf, or you're hoping that the entities, the university, outreach gets something done with that.
Yes, no, absolutely. And nobody will ever be incentivized and work round the clock for you other
Mhm.
than yourself. And so if you
Yeah,
truly believe in something, the only way is to really push it forward yourself. And lots of university translation departments are really great, but that's if you have a product that basically sells itself, or an
yeah,
innovation that sells itself. All these other ones, which most of these innovations are, really need a champion,
yeah,
and that's where the incentive really lies. And
yeah.
you mentioned about risk, and I would be remiss without saying that being an entrepreneur and being an innovator in the medical device space it does open you up to criticism. It opens you up to major bias, obviously. And when I talk about the device, I always start off by loudly saying my conflicts of interest. And
Mhm.
I would say that sometimes that's a detractor for some of the stuff that I really believe in. And I say, even though there's a conflict of interest, this is something without the conflict I truly believe in. But what I've noticed, because I practiced before I was an innovator and entrepreneur without major conflicts of interest. But like people think these very large grants that you might get from these very large institutions and national institutions, that they're a feather in the cap. You can't have bias if you've got this massive grant. Well, guess what? They're under probably more stress to get positive results to get the next grant than the next person. And that's not really seen in the same lens, because of course, like from a commercialization perspective, one of the 1,000 companies could make it big. And that's why those conflicts of interest are in place. I have a lot of thoughts about innovation, entrepreneurship, and being a doctor. You have to put the patients first, always. No
Mhm.
matter what decision you ever make, you have to do that. And that's what my partner and I have always done right from day one, even if it means spending more money and or losing money or losing revenue. You have to put the patients first, because in the long run, that's what you'll look back and be proud of. Not if you sold the company for $1 billion. It's, did
Yeah,
you help someone? Did you do the right thing?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting, I find too, that I think, you disclose those conflicts, whatever they might be, as a presenter, but the data will speak for itself, right? I mean, it's always good to, you disclose those. That, opens the things up for transparency. But at the end of the day, it's the data, right? And what those outcomes look like, right?
That is a great point, but I'll even nuance it further. Is
Uh-huh.
that industry sponsored data is still biased.
Hmm.
The absolute best data that you can get, which I love, and it happens with our device, is when we're not involved. And they
Yeah.
go and do the whatever they want with it and publish without our involvement. That
Yeah.
doesn't happen a whole lot in the medical device industry these days. But when it happens, I think it's extra special.
Yeah, for sure. So, your insights have been really helpful, and I'm wondering, for as mentioned, we have a lot of aspiring innovators and entrepreneurs out there. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to help them turn their ideas into a viable innovation or product? Do you have any insights for us there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is because who actually thinks, I'm an innovator? Nobody thinks that. And I like to tell people about, well, if you're going to invent a toy, everybody knows about toys, and trying to invent a great toy for a child that is a real success is really impossible because everybody in the world has access to that information. Well, guess what? As a clinician, you get more and more experienced and you literally come to the end of knowledge of your field. You become an expert in your field. Well, guess how many people in the world become experts in their field? Not that many. So the pool of people that are potentially thinking of inventions or new things actually gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then and really removing that intimidation to take that next step, think of something, that just knowing that there's a new way, that there's an innovation that potentially could come out of your brain because there's not a whole lot of people thinking about it. I find that removes that first step, and then people sort of take and dive in.
Yeah, and to build off of that, like first or second question we ask, it's not always that aha moment, right? Sometimes it's just small, modest improvements that can really help lead to a new product, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. And you can't stop with one. That's the other thing is don't think that if you're going to be an innovator, your first invention or first thing that you think of that might be patentable is going to be a huge thing. I mean, there was more than 30 ideas that I had before we ever landed on one thing to potentially take forward and commercialize because it has to check all those boxes. Sometimes it's a really great invention, probably the best solution for one patient in a million. Like, that doesn't make sense to commercialize. So you have to have it make sense from ultimately a commercial standpoint to move forward with it. And so the more ideas you come up with, that might not be your best idea that you move forward with, but if you start checking more and more boxes, that's the one that's going to be the winner for you.
Yeah, for sure. So, Adam, this seems like a real exciting time for you and your team at Frontline Medical. What does the future hold? Where are you going from here?
Yeah, I mean, we're continue to grow geographically. I mean, trauma and bleeding is a global problem. It's not a local problem, and so getting in more geographic areas with the COBRA-OS, especially broadening the different applications, postpartum hemorrhage and upcoming non-traumatic cardiac arrest is really important. But of course, being innovators, inventors, we can't stop thinking of other products, and so of course we
Mhm.
have pipeline ideas that we're always tinkering with, and that's what's really exciting on a day-to-day basis for us.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like a lot of time at the drawing board and a lot of fun conversations ongoing. So, Adam, first of all, I'd like to just acknowledge and thank you for the time to be our guru today. If somebody wants to learn a little bit more, how do we find out more about you and your team? Is there a website? Are you on LinkedIn? How do we learn a little bit more about Frontline Medical?
Yeah, probably the best thing is check out our website, www.frontlinemedtech.com. And we're on LinkedIn as well. We have lots of information and education surrounding trauma and bleeding in our LinkedIn pages.
Yeah, fantastic. So once again, Adam, I'd really like to thank you for your time and insights today. I learned a lot.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's been a pleasure, and I really love what you're doing with MedTech Gurus.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048 @gmail.com. And I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.